What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic DFS channel, and we are talking Week 7 College Football DFS ahead of the Friday slate. 2 games up, we're going to break down everything you need to know. But before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We are brought to you today by Prize Picks, and if you've never heard of Prize Picks, they are daily prop-based offerings. No sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You're just creating lineups of player props, up to 5 of them, where you can 10 extra entry fee. You can also use your knowledge across sports. We're talking college football today, but you could use NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL. It's all going on right now. You can mix and match to your liking. And if you click the video, or you click the link in the video description below, you're going to get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum and up to a $100 match deposit bonus when you sign up and make a deposit with Prize Picks. All right, without further ado, let's dive into this. We've got 2 games to talk about. Here's our player data usage tool. On the back end, you're going to see seconds per play, that's pace, pass rate, offensive, defensive line matchups, that's just the sacks they allow versus the sacks they generate, your Vegas data, and then your defensive metrics, how many yards they allow through the air, on the ground, and then per attempt to contextualize it. 2-game slate is really interesting on Friday. It's Navy taking on SMU and UTSA taking on FIU. Really weird games. And anytime you have an armed forces team running the triple option, it leads to some nuance. Navy is the first team we'll talk about here. They're 13-point underdogs, 57-point total. Stark difference in offensive philosophies. Navy's 124th in pace. They're only passing 19% of the time. That is a staple of the triple option. And that's almost the exact opposite of SMU, who's second in pace, 58% pass rate. But let's kick things off with Navy. They're using their quarterback as a glorified running back, as most triple option teams do. Ty Lavatai is the signal caller. He actually has pretty good passing numbers for a triple option quarterback. 105 yards per game on 11.5 attempts. You'll see that elevated in games they trail. They project to do so here. So that's automatically an issue for Lavatai. We'd rather have him running just because they're generally not an efficient passing attack. But he's also not the most involved in the ground, unlike some other armed force academies. Lavatai only averages, just north of 25 yards per game. That's not ideal for a glorified running back that you need to play the quarterback slot. But there certainly is upside if he punches it into the end zone a couple times here. Just kind of tough to trust him at his price. So Lavatai immediately is a hard guy to play. You'll notice there's a clear tier and Lavatai is below it. But let's go to the runners. This is also a spot where they've kind of ebbed and flowed a lot this year. Daba Fofana leads the team with 65 touches, all of them on the ground. That's 53.2 yards per game on 13 touches per game from Fofana, but it's not consistent. We've seen him in single-digit touches. Most recently, he was at 21 touches, but I think he's probably the best option price-adjusted because he does lead the team and he is the most efficient. You'll see Mcquell Haywood right behind him, more of a slot back. He averages 10.4 touches per game, 41.5 rushing yards, but he's involved in the pass game as well, averages 17 there. Haywood is actually tied for second on the team in targets with 11, so he's somewhat active everywhere. Behind him, this is where it gets dicey. Anton Hall missed their last game. No indication whether he's going to play or not, and I didn't see anyone report an injury, but you look at his carry count, he went from 8 to 22 to 1 to 0. There might be an injury here, or maybe he flat out got benched. You're not going to know. So take a shot on Anton Hall if you like, but he's probably the riskiest option on the entire slate because of the lack of reporting that Navy has. You're just flat out not going to get this information, more than likely. And then you have Logan Point. He's now carried the ball 10 times, 0 times, 0 times, and 8 times. Vincent Terrell's taken on a larger role. His carry counts are 0, 1, 5, and 17. Is that because of blowout, or is that because Anton Hall missed time last week? I flat out don't know. It wasn't exactly the closest game Navy played. They had a double-digit victory last week, so could it be because of the blowout? Maybe. Could it be because of the injury? Also, maybe. This is one of the diciest situations we've had all season long because of the uncertainty, the lack of reporting. And Navy just has been in some weird games, some non-competitive. They played Air Force, another Armed Force Academy. Their schedule is tough to take a lot away from. Behind them, we need to talk receivers because it's a 2-game slate. My approach generally is to fade these players even at their cheap prices, even on a 2-game slate. Mark Walker and Jaden Umbarger are the two guys that see the most targets. They both have 12 this year. They have 119 receiving yards for Walker, 110 for Umbarger. My take is you can probably punt with an SMU receiver or a UTSA receiver at similar prices and get better production. But for tournaments, Walker and Umbarger need to be considered just because it's a 2-game slate. And then Vincent Terrell and Mcquell Haywood are the wide receivers 3 and 4. They're technically like your slot backs on this team. So they receive volume on the ground and through the air. That's where I would try to go, but they both have running back tags, which has a bit of opportunity cost here as well. If I were ranking the Navy players, it's 1 Fofana, 2 Haywood, 3 Vincent Terrell, and then the 4s we get into Anton Hall, Logan Point type range where I don't even know if they play. But let's go over to SMU, a far more desirable team to target here. Tanner Mordecai is one of the top 2 signal callers, and then there's that massive tier break. So 2-game slate, expect most of your lineups to have Mordecai and Frank Harris to spoil this a little bit, but Mordecai is averaging 334 yards through the air per game on 42 attempts. It's an up-tempo, pass-heavy SMU attack. He hasn't rushed as much this year, only 12 yards on the ground. He's previously rushed a lot more than that. So I think part of it is they played a negative game script and now lost 3 straight games. When they're playing from ahead, you shouldn't see quite as many negative plays from Mordecai. He's flat out just a top 2 signal caller. Play Mordecai. In the backfield, we're seeing a changing of the guard a little bit here. Trey Siggers was previously the lead back on this team, and he kind of had a bell cow workload. But last week, Siggers and Velton Gardner each handled 12 touches. Siggers came off the injury. He's been flat out bad since. On 60 carries, he is 229 yards. Velton Gardner on 37 carries is 230 yards. Velton Gardner's outrushed him despite seeing 23 fewer carries. And that's been reflected recently. Velton Gardner went from 5 carries to 9 carries, most recently to 12. Now, I don't know if he's going to flat out take the job from Siggers, but this is justified. Velton Gardner should be receiving more work in this backfield. He's also not a bad pass catcher either. They don't target the running back a ton here, but Trey Siggers has only out-targeted Velton Gardner 8-7 this year. It is very close. So to me, better price adjusted play is Velton Gardner. He's just 3,500, seeing the same workload, and there's a chance he just plays ahead of Siggers. Now, the one thing I'll say for Siggers, he's been hurt, so maybe this is all injury related and he'll get back to form here. I'm not betting on that. In the receiving game, Rashee Rice is a stone lock, as close to a stone lock as you could possibly have in DFS in college football. 137 yards per game, 15.2 targets per game. That volume is unbelievable, unheard of. You just start your lineup with him and move on. Outside of that, we had Jake Bailey injured. He's now out for the year, and that leaves a massive hole on this team. I want to start with Beau Corrales. He's now returned from injury, played 2 games, saw 5 targets and 6 targets, which is good volume for him, but the routes still quite aren't there. But because of the injury, there's a chance he takes a step forward, which makes him my second favorite play among pass catchers here. 40% route rate last week. That was up from 23% the week before. Then you have Kelvante Dixon, also known as Moochie Dixon, splitting time with Austin Upshaw. I think one of them probably plays the 3. Last week, Austin Upshaw, 43% of the routes. Moochie Dixon, 33%. However, Moochie Dixon's been far more involved from a target perspective. They both had 4 last week, but Moochie Dixon hasn't seen any less than 4 in any of the last 4 games, whereas Upshaw's only hit that 4 target role once. One other wrinkle here, we have actually 2 more wrinkles. The player that actually saw the biggest jump in targets was Dylan Goffney. 72% of routes. I shouldn't see jump in targets. He actually didn't see a lot of targets, but 72% of routes was ahead of Corrales, Upshaw, and Dixon. He just doesn't have a lot of targets on the year. He's down at 4 targets overall, 1 target in the last game, despite all those routes. Basically a win sprinter, but he was second on the team in routes behind Rashee Rice last week. So that's one wrinkle. And the last one, Roderick Daniels, who you see here at 4,500, he left the team briefly, hasn't played in any of the last 3 games, was reported to be targeting the portal away from the program. The coaching staff convinced him to return. Back in weeks 1 and week 2, he had a 54% route rate and a 45% route rate. For reference, That was more than Kelvante Dixon. That was more than Austin Upshaw. Beau Corrales was still injured. He wasn't there, but that was also more than Dylan Goffney. He was essentially the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, whatever you want to call it, before he left the team. So how much does he play in his first week back? All this to say there's a lot of options down here. Again, if I were ranking them, my favorite would be Corrales at his price, but I'll be taking shots on Goffney and Daniels, Upshaw, and Moochie Dixon. And we didn't even mention RJ Maryland, their tight end. He's fourth on the team in targets. The only problem with Maryland is his route rate is just shy of 30%. And I don't really see much room for that growing with all these players coming back to the offense. But this is a great GPP team. You've got a ton of pass volume here. One locked in target in Rice. And behind Rice, the world is yours. Play them all in GPPs, mix and match. That will be my approach. Game 2, it's UTSA taking on FIU. It is a 33.5-point spread in favor of UTSA. 62.5 total here. Both teams are fast, actually. UTSA 17th in pace. FIU 37th. Both teams pass heavy. UTSA 52% pass rate. FIU 57.4. But you can tell there's a vast difference in skill here between the teams. Frank Harris is the other quarterback. You're essentially just locking into your lineups. We don't really need to get into his stats. He's mobile. He's awesome passing volume. 3 of the best receivers in the conference. The only reason not to play Mordecai and Frank Harris in the same lineup is if you're playing large field tournaments and you want to take a massive stand for leverage. More than likely, you're going to lose, though. Play Harris, play Mordecai. In the backfield, you had Traylon Smith return to action. He now is forming a 1-2 punch with Brendan Brady. Still about 60-40 split in favor of Brady. Brady averages 18.3 touches per game, 64.2 rushing yards, but then another 23.8 receiving. This is a good team in terms of volume in the pass game. He has 16 targets on the year. That's solid. Traylon Smith's not a great pass catcher, so I expect most of that to be Brendan Brady's. He's the preferred play, but Smith, if you need a cheaper option, is live. They're going to score a ton of points here. The 3 receivers. Okay, listen to this. Zachary Franklin, 11 targets per game, 97.3 targets per game, 97.3 yards per game. DeCorian Clark, 9.5 targets per game, 105.3 receiving yards per game. Joshua Cephas, 9.7 targets per game, 89.5 yards per game. Play any of these 3 you want, mix and match them, play 2, play all 3 for all I care. These guys are awesome. There's really no holes to poke. If you made me rank them, I would pick DeCorian Clark 1 because of the efficiency, but we're literally splitting hairs as much as you can be splitting hairs here. All 3 guys are awesome. Their tight end is a mixture of Oscar Cardenas and Dan Dishman. They're both just uninvolved here. If I had to play one, it'd be Cardenas, but I'd rather play a cheap SMU receiver. And then, this is a potential blowout. So if you do see blowout level volume here, the wide receiver 4 is typically Tyke Ogle Kellogg. 2 targets last week. Those were his only 2 targets on the year. And I guess same thing for running back. If this blows out, you're going to see more Ty Edwards and Kavorian Barnes, but no real good field there. FIU. So they lost Gunnar Holmberg in week 1. That means they've had to go to Grayson James. His volume is kind of messed up here because, well, they started Holmberg first. They've gotten blown out so bad in games that Hayden Carlson's played a fair amount for them. But there is a lot of volume to go around when they are actually competitive. So Grayson James isn't the worst. He is mobile, 93 rushing yards on the year. He has designed rush attempt counts of 4, 17, and 6 in the last 3 games. UTSA hasn't played good defense. So if you are getting off the board, I'd rather play Grayson James than a Naval quarterback. In the running game, Lexington Joseph has moved ahead of EJ Wilson. It's still pretty close between these guys. Like EJ Wilson, he still had 9 touches last game. Lexington Joseph came in with just 8. So that's a bit of a problem. EJ Wilson, most of that came in the pass game. What you're seeing here is basically a 50-50 timeshare. Just know it's slightly balanced in favor of Lexington. Ultimately, it's a really bad offense with 2 players that are projected to be in a timeshare. I'm probably not playing either of these guys, but again, if I had to, it would be Lexington, albeit by a very small margin. In the receiving game, this is key. Tyrese Chambers is questionable. He's the only real good skill position player on this team, the only player with real talent. He was averaging 8.2 targets per game, but he got hurt immediately in the last game. Only participated in 6.5 routes, went down, didn't return. On the year, he's averaging 52.5 yards, again, on those 8.2 targets. He's fine if he plays. I'm skeptical of that. And when he went out, Jalen Bracey popped up for 11 targets. Now, he's averaging 5.2 on the year. None of these pass catchers are efficient behind Chambers, but somebody would have to see this target volume. And the number one would be Bracey. Interestingly, they moved Chris Mitchell up to their wide receiver too. He participated in 90% of the routes, which is crazy for as uninvolved as he was. But that's a massive route. It was actually 96% to be exact. But you should see some upgrade on the 2 targets, the 2.6 targets he's received per game. If that volume persists, he would be a perfectly fine punt play. And then the wide receiver 3 was still Dean Patterson. Interestingly, Dean Patterson's route stayed at 54%. He kind of worked in tandem with Josiah Meeman, the tight end. He had a 50% route share. Jacoby Hewitt popped up for 44% route share. All this to say, it is going to be a timeshare behind the big 3 options we have here. So again, Chambers, if he plays, is the one. From there, it's Bracey, then Mitchell, and then you're largely looking at timeshares between Dean Patterson, Josiah Meeman, and then the likes of, everyone else we mentioned here. But that'll do it for today's slate. Let me know what you think about these plays in the comment section. Would love to hear if there's a player you really like, something you disagree with, whatever it may be. I'll make sure to get back to you. And if you'd like, reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Matt_Gajeski. And we'll be back again tomorrow, breaking down the full main slate, so don't miss that. Otherwise, good luck, everybody. We'll catch you again soon.